Oakley Albert Kite Jr., better known as his nickname Al, was born on May 7, 1951 in Nash County, North Carolina, to Oakley Albert Kite Sr. and Edith Davis Kite. Oakley Kite Sr. was a well-renowned dog trainer in the area, who was a co-founder and partner in a North Carolina dog training company called Oakey and Hunter Grove. His mother, who passed away when Al was just 18, was a housewife. He had grown up in Halifax County, North Carolina. He attended Weldon High School, and upon graduation attended Atlantic Christian College, where he majored in business administration. In 1971, Al began working for Stone & Webster, a large engineering services company. He began working for them at the Surrey nuclear plant near Richmond, Virginia. There, he started out at the timekeeper, before being quickly promoted to a department lead. In 1976, Al would marry his high school friend Gail Kay. She had a daughter, Julie, who Al was a loving stepfather to. They didn't have any children together. They divorced amicably in 1988, and Al continued his job. He traveled all over the U.S. and even spent time in Algeria, ending up in California in the early 1990s, working on projects with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, San Francisco's International Airport, and Bay Area Rapid Transit. In 1988, Al took a new position with Stone & Webster in Colorado, moving to Aurora, a town on the outskirts of Denver, because of his love for the outdoors. His new house was 2002 South Helena Street, between Cherry Creek State Park and Buckley Air Force Base, near Interstate 225. The house itself was a 2-story townhouse, which had a lot of room inside. Al often commented that it was too much room for a bachelor who preferred to spend his time outdoors. At some point in the early 2000s, he decided to turn the finished basement into a standalone apartment. Doing so would allow him to help pay the mortgage, while also filling up some space that he wasn't using, and keep the bachelor company. This came in handy in 2002 when Al's employer let him go after 31 years. But thanks to his tenant, he was able to keep afloat. Thankfully, he was able to obtain employment again just a short time later when he began working for Carter Douglas, a consulting firm. In 2004, the tenant had been renting out Al's basement apartment for a couple of years, told Al they were planning to move out in a few months' time. As such, they wouldn't be renewing their lease. Thankfully for the bachelor, he wouldn't be alone for long. Al began dating a woman named Linda Angelopoulos in the same year. This tenant did move out in May of 2004, and Al began making plans to find another tenant. He put in an advertisement for his sublet. Sources seem to differ where he put his advertisement. Some sources say that this advertisement was only put in the University of Colorado's medical library, and other sources just say the advertisement was generally advertised in a newspaper. One man responded to Al's advertisements for a roommate on May 19, 2004. Robert Cooper was the name of the man. Robert Cooper had just moved from the East Coast and was taking a job at Wells Fargo and temporarily living with his sister in the area. Linda never met Robert Cooper. They were in the house together for a brief moment while Robert was signing some forms before she went out with Al, but she had to use the restroom, and before she came out, Robert Cooper had found an excuse to leave. Still, she could see that he was dressed very nice, in a nice pair of pants and suit. Based on her conversations with Al, as well as a brief glimpse as she caught of Robert Cooper, she described him as being in his 40s, around 5'8" to 5'10", approximately 180 pounds, and had dark, somewhat wavy hair. His most distinctive characteristic was that he walked with a limp, and he had to use a cane to stabilize himself. Nonetheless, Al was eager to get his room rented out, and the pair quickly agreed on a security deposit that Robert Cooper would pay half of the month's rent and move in as soon as possible. On Saturday, May 22nd, Al drove Linda to the airport where she was headed to Virginia Beach and made plans to call him when she reached her destination. At around 3:30 p.m. that day, she landed and gave Al a call. Sources differ on exactly what was said, and some reports write that Al seemed to be in a good mood. Others say he was distracted. That would be the last time anyone ever spoke to Al. On Monday, May 24th, Al's absence was noted at work. He was considered a punctual and reliable employee, so his boss got in contact with his sister, who was still residing in the East Coast area. She then called the Aurora Police Department and requested that they perform a welfare check on her brother. Down in the basement, the responding officers found the body of Al laying face down, with blood splatter located along the wall and floor around his body. Detective Thomas Sobieski of the Aurora Police Department responded to the call and would become one of the lead investigators for the case. He later described the crime scene as the worst he had ever seen. The coroner noted a wound on the back of Al's head, which indicated that he had been hit from behind. They theorized that this had happened when he was walking down the basement steps. Unfortunately, Al did not die of those wounds. His hands were bound with a cord, and his feet were then tied to his hands behind his back. He had in essence been hog-tied. Al had been mercilessly tortured for several hours with special injuries done to his feet. The fatal injury seemed to have been 22 stab wounds, and the coroner ruled he died the same day he spoke to Linda, the evening of Saturday, March 22nd. After Al had been killed, the killer had then proceeded to eat food from Al's kitchen, took a shower in the master bedroom, slept in Al's bed, and even wore articles of Al's clothing. The house had seemingly been wiped down for fingerprints. Bleach had been poured down the shower drain, and the killer had soaked multiple knives in bleach afterwards. The drain had been plugged, and in the sink were anywhere between 6 and 12 knives, as well as a number of household items, including a drinking glass, a pen, a dishwashing scrubber, and Al's car keys. The sink had been filled with Clorox bleach. Immediately, investigators began working on a motive for the crime. They began to develop a theory that this is a methodically planned robbery, as police discovered that Al's blue and gray GMC pickup truck as well as his cell phone were missing. Later in the day of Monday, May 24, Al Kite's blue and gray GMC pickup truck was found, with ATM receipts on the front seat. The vehicle had been parked a little over a block and a half away from Al's home, along the street. As investigators conducted a search of the vehicle, hoping to uncover some forensic evidence of the killer, they also began a thorough search of Al's home. They were able to find trace amounts of DNA, presumably left behind by the killer, and that would be submitted to a forensic database shortly thereafter. However, while looking through the garbage can in Al's kitchen, investigators found a discarded rental application. This application, which looked to have been handwritten by the mysterious tenant moving into Al's basement, contained the stranger's name, mailing address, social security number, and phone number. The name on the rental application read Robert Cooper. Case solved, right? Wrong. Robert Cooper. The story of Robert Cooper starts in March of 2004. A man buys a burner phone from a 7-Eleven near the University of Colorado and then waits 30 long days to activate it, the exact length of time it takes for that 7-Eleven to delete security camera footage. Al wasn't the only prospective renter that Robert Cooper talked to. A University of Colorado professor met Robert Cooper to discuss renting out her property to him, except this Robert Cooper didn't have a limp or carry a cane and spoke with a Romanian accent. Apparently this professor was familiar with Eastern European accents. Robert Cooper made contact with several different renters in the lead-up to meeting Al. He fit the same basic physical description each and every time. Sometimes a man had a cane, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he had an accent, sometimes he had none, and his mannerisms were different each time, but they all agreed on his physical description. Several renters said that Robert Cooper made them feel uneasy, and he didn't behave like previous tenants had. Most of these properties were advertised in the University of Colorado library, much like Al's may have been. It's not exactly sure when Robert Cooper first met Al, but it was likely in mid-May of 2004. One of his neighbors recalled seeing him leave Al's house on May 19th, so they established that as the first day of contact. Over the next few days, another male neighbor approached Robert Cooper, only to be ignored, and a female neighbor said she encountered him on a walking trail nearby, sans cane. Both said he seemed eerie and just stared them down. But the police had his rental application, so it would be easy enough to find him, right? If only it was that easy. His current address, supposedly of the sister he was staying with, was actually a building at the University of Colorado's medical school. His social security number belonged to an unrelated woman, and Wells Fargo had no record of anyone by that name being employed anywhere close to Colorado. They searched for the phone of Al, as well as a prepaid phone number given by Robert Cooper, found them both in Denver. However, neither were in the hands of Robert Cooper himself. Instead, they had been abandoned in Five Points neighborhood of Denver, an area known to have a lot of homeless people, and was being used by one of them. Police theorized that the killer knew this, and hoped that by distributing the phones to homeless people, it would erase some evidence. The ATM receipts found in Al's pickup truck were also examined. Investigators were able to determine that a withdrawal was made from a Wells Fargo ATM near Al's house on the night of Saturday, May 22nd. This ATM had a camera, but Robert Cooper was wearing a ski mask. Pictures taken from this camera are available to look at today. With this discovery, robbery was discarded as a motive. For one, the items stolen from his house, his phone and car, were both found without the murderer. Secondly, while $1,000 in 2004, approximately 15 USD today, is not chump change, Al had much more than that in his ATM. The killer presumably had access to this all weekend, and if he wanted to, he could have presumably withdrawn much more than he did. Additionally, Al's friends and family said that Al would have just told the killer his PIN number if the killer wanted it, without going through the trouble of torturing him. The police had fingerprints and a small amount of DNA for the man. They have come to the following conclusions about Robert Cooper. He is likely killed before and is presumably a methodical serial killer. He may be from the East Coast, particularly from the area around New Jersey or New York City. He may be Eastern European, particularly Romanian. He may also be familiar with the University of Colorado, specifically their medical school. He may have some connection with the banking industry, specifically Wells Fargo, and he may have had a female relative that lived in Aurora, Colorado area at some point. Physically, it is believed he is approximately 5'8" to 5'10", around 170 to 180 pounds, had wavy dark hair, likely in his 30s or 40s. In 2017, the DNA left at the crime scene was analyzed and determined he was from Southeast Europe with brown eyes, brown-black hair, and pale skin. The Aurora Police Department has announced that they are going to work on forensic genealogy, starting in 2021 to figure it out. So this case does have a possibility of being solved. Theories. Due to the lack of evidence and the very unique way in which this murder occurred, there's not a ton of theories about this case. It's also not very popular among true crime circles, so there are not tons of theories on this. This is a long theory and connects to the currently unsolved murder of Lee Scott Hall, a colleague of Al's when Al worked at the Lawrence Livermore Lab in 1990. Hall discovered a flaw with a laser alignment in a project for the National Ignition Facility, and after a fix proposed by this team was approved, got a substantial raise from it. Hall was then found dead after being beaten and stabbed in his home on October 20th of 1999, and the laboratory was cited by the police as being uncooperative in the investigation. Nothing was stolen, and his car was also found a block away from the crime scene. Ultimately, I believe this theory is no more than coincidence. Hall was not tied up or tortured in the same way as Al, and their murder was separated by over 4 years. The Lawrence Livermore Laboratory is a large institution, currently employing over 7,000 people, and there's no evidence that Al and Hall worked particularly close together, or even knew each other. Many people have compared the man seen in the ATM footage to Israel Keyes. He does look fairly similar, but I'm not spending much time on this theory because there's DNA and fingerprint evidence, and I'm assuming that Israel Keyes would have been tested and ruled out. If you have any information on this case, please contact the FBI. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I would love to know what you guys think about this case in the comments section. Share your theories on this true crime mystery. If you want your story featured on an upcoming video, please email it to my email in the description box below. Until we meet again, stay safe and stay sinful.